Hello, I'm Robin Hauser, documentary filmmaker at Finish Line Features, and it is my honor to introduce the closing keynote speaker, Ellen Pao. She is the former CEO of Reddit and the co-founder and CEO of the award-winning diversity and inclusion nonprofit Project Include. Ellen is an entrepreneur and an investor. Formerly, she was a venture capitalist at Kleiner Perkins and at K4 Capital. Ellen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Absolutely. I'll turn the stage over to you.
Great. We need a reset. We know we have a problem and need to do better. But what we're doing now to solve it isn't working. We need to completely reset our companies. I'm here to talk to you about how companies can reset and accelerate change. It's not enough to talk about it anymore. We need action. Each and every one of you can accelerate change, and that's what it's going to take. I run a nonprofit called Project Include. We advocate for change. We use data, we use experiences. Often we're very aggressive about it. And we push people to do the work to change the world. After almost a decade of activism, what I've learned is change is slow. It's hard and it takes work. We've experienced, though, positive change in mindset and attitudes. Now people know that bias and harassment are real and present. But moving from that understanding and from intent to real impact has been very incremental. And that incremental change isn't making enough of a difference. So we need a reset. The problem that we have is that companies can't seem to hire and retain and promote people from historically underrepresented groups. And I see this in tech, in academia, in all areas of STEM. We know that there's bias, and we know that intersectionality works even more as a barrier to success for Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and Asian women, for transgender women, for disabled women, for older women. We have all the research that shows why inclusion is valuable. We know that diversity means better decision-making for boards and for teams. We know that companies with gender diversity have a 25% higher likelihood of above average financial returns. We know that adding racial diversity means a 36% higher likelihood of better financial returns. We know that it creates 19% of higher innovation revenues, and on and on and on. And for whom financial performance and company performance isn't enough of an incentive, companies now need to show how diverse and inclusive they are to hire. Our racial and ethnic demographics are changing and have already changed for people under 17 in the US. And did you know that 25% of our population is disabled? That's 1 in 4 people. Another fact, 79% of new grads believe that diversity and inclusion is very important in the workplace, and they are putting their beliefs into action. This week in the Stanford Daily, it reported that students, where Udacity was founded at Stanford, are turning down lucrative jobs at Google because they don't agree with Google's ethics or with Google's lack of diversity. So we know we need to change, and we know that it's going to be good for companies, and we know we need to change what we're doing too, because it's not working. Diversity reports are becoming scarcer and less transparent as companies fail to improve meaningfully. The last Facebook report showed that the percentage of women employees went down in 2020 to 36.7%. And technical roles, there are only less than 25% of the technical roles are held by women. They don't have any intersectional numbers. There continues to be underrepresentation by race and ethnicity, with only 2% of employees being Black and less than 5% Latinx. So we see that we have this problem. We're not solving the problem. Government has recently stepped in. Even regulations, though, have been hard fought. In 2018, California became the first US state to pass a board diversity law. It seems pretty simple. It just requires public companies that are headquartered in California to have at least 1 female board member in the first year, and then up to 3 for boards with 6 or more board members in the future. So, they require you to file an annual report on board diversity to show that you're complying with this law. And they've even put some teeth into it. So companies that fail to comply pay a $100,000 fine for the first failure, and it goes up to $300,000 for each subsequent failure. And yet, Companies and CEOs and boards aren't taking action. Change is so slow. The boards continue to be homogeneous. In December 2019, they reported on the status of the outcome of what has happened with this law. California companies added 68 women to company boards to comply with the new law. Of the 625 companies covered by the law, barely half, only 330, filed the mandatory diversity report. And of those, 48 still had all male boards in violation of the law, even though, despite all the fines and despite the fact that, all you have to do was add one woman to your board. And today we see, we continue to have a lack of women on public company board seats. Women held only 6.5% of California's public company board seats. That's about 1 out of 15. And only 6.6% of the board seats held by women were held by women who were Black, Latinx, or Asian American. So that's 1 out of 15 of the 1 out of 15. This is what we're up against when we try to give women opportunities when we are using the current way of running companies. Even the government can't mandate fairness and inclusion into existence. Well, why is it so hard? Well, we can't give people from underrepresented communities opportunities until we make our companies and our leaders less sexist, less racist, less ableist. We need to stop the bias. Our cultures are broken, and it's hard work to change it. So I want to talk about how we can change it. What should we be doing, right? It's great. I think a lot of people want to change things. People have good intent. We understand the nature of the problem is systemic. And one of the things that we really need to do to take into account the systemic nature is to focus on the long term. Often companies take a short-term view instead of solving the long-term problem. We've always had this short-term focus on inclusion. Often it's aimed at press releases. How can we make sure that we're doing the latest fad in inclusion? But really, we need to think about the long-term, solving these problems and making sure that our cultures and our companies are inclusive. And one of the examples of how companies are short-term focused is how companies deal with harassment. Often we focus on pushing out the person who made the claim, who reported the harassment, and that, in the short term, it makes it easier for everyone. You've pushed out the person who says there's a problem. The people remaining continue to, as business as usual. We have tools and a process, and that's what we do. We can hire and pay an investigator who looks to us to let them know what answers they want. And if we're very brave, we can push out the harasser, but we don't push out or fix the systems that allowed it. Even when Uber hired Eric Holder, they didn't follow his recommendations. The former Attorney General of the United States told them what to do, and they didn't listen. It's a systemic problem. Often the change is, long-term, and in the short term, it feels painful. And the end result, in our current process, it looks like the problem is solved because we've pushed 1 or 2 people out. But what happens in real life is actually longer term, the problem festers. People learn not to report because they see that people are getting pushed out. The people who are looking to see whether harassment is acceptable or not learn that harassment is acceptable. So you end up having more harassment, less reporting. What can we do that's different? And that's what we really need to think about. A big part is doing the work, right? People will often take the easy path and they ask what is the one thing that we can change? But it's a complete reset. We need to change everything to make our companies inclusive. We tried incremental. In the early 2015 through 2020, there was a big focus on women, like adding women. And we added a lot of women, but they were white women. And we added them into 1 or 2 areas, but we didn't give them full access because our companies were still exclusive. We didn't solve the problem around inclusion because we didn't look to include everyone. The cultures were still exclusionary, and just because we were able to open the door to a few more people didn't change that. We need to take a systemic approach. Often we're fixing small things, and that's not going to fix the problem. It doesn't go away on its own. People will find a way. So at Project Include, we recently released a report on what has happened to our workplaces since COVID-19. We surveyed almost 3,000 people, and what we found was that that there was a lot more harassment than we expected. More than 1 in 4 people experienced an increase in gender-based harassment since the pandemic. And what we learned was that, we had thought maybe we could change tools, like these online tools were the problem. And if we looked at the tools and if we found problems in the tools and had maybe better reporting or, ability to block, that it would actually improve the situation. But when we looked at the data and the response, we found that it wasn't specific tools, it wasn't tools in general, it was the people. That people will find a way to be sexist, racist, ageist, ableist, homophobic, transphobic, and more from wherever they are. The tools won't fix it. Even being physically separated didn't stop harassment. It's baked into the cultures, and we really need to think about the systemic change and changing the big things. At Project Include, we have 3 core values. We know that inclusion means everyone. It's not just include one group and then work one group at a time. If we were going to do that, I told a VC who was working on including just women, well, you're going to work on that for 3 years, and then maybe you'll include you'll include maybe Black people, and you'll work on that for 3 or 4 years, and then maybe you'll get to another group, and it's going to take you 100 years to become an inclusive firm. It doesn't work that way. You need to include everyone. The second core value we have is a comprehensive approach. It's not just hiring people in and hoping that they survive. It's not just paying people fairly and hoping that that works. It's really looking at everything that you do and making sure that from the whole employee life cycle, you're inclusive. And then the third core value is measuring. Metrics, metrics, metrics for accountability. If you don't measure, you're not going to manage it. You're not going to know if it's working or not. You're not going to be able to do more of what's working and less of what's not working. And you're not going to be able to find patterns of, why does this work? And how can we do something similar and do more of it? So we need to change everything. We need to do the hard work. We need to hold people accountable. We need to take some risk and experiment. We don't know any company that has solved this problem. If you see in every conference, people are often asked, what's one company that's doing a good job? And it's really hard to answer because, the company that you thought was doing a good job actually ends up having problems later on because we just don't have the tools. We don't have the solutions. We haven't seen people actually do all of the right things yet because it is such a huge cultural change. So what we need is for people to take more risk, for them to experiment, to try to find the ways that we can change everything. And that means doing things differently. It also means stopping and thinking about the implications of everything that you're doing. Whose benefits and who gets harmed? Who is included and who is excluded? Who has the power in the situation and who doesn't? Are you exacerbating known problems? Are you solving the problem for the long term? What are the incentives of your actions and what is the long-term impact? So I want to step back for a second and also say it's not as hard as you think it is. It's work. We did this at Reddit. When I was at Reddit, I became a CEO in 2014, and we had a lot of problems internally in the culture. And we had a problem around harassment, mostly around inappropriate conversations. And we had some, unprofessional drunken behavior. So we needed a complete reset. And what we did was, it was a lot of work, but it was not that hard. We created company values, and part of those values were around safety and inclusion. And it was done by a committee of employees, so it was bottom up and top down at the same time. We shared them publicly to hold ourselves accountable. We had an offsite where we talked about part of our company offsite included a section on culture and on harassment not being part of that culture. We brought in Mitch Kapor and Frida Kapor-Klein to talk about, why harassment was bad, why culture is important, and to talk about change and inclusion so that it wasn't just me talking about it, it was other people as well to reinforce the message. And as part of that conversation, we invited people to talk to our human resources team if they experienced problems. And if they had experienced in particular problems around harassment or inappropriate behavior.
As a result, we had a lot of people come forward. We listened to their experiences. We went to the people who had had the inappropriate behavior and inappropriate conversations, and we told them that what they did was wrong. They understood it, and we told them that they would be fired if they did it again. We hired and promoted people to the first executive team, and that team was extremely diverse. We had 2 Latinx women, we had a Black woman, we had a Muslim man, a white Latinx woman, an Asian man, and 2 white men. And so that group was one that helped reinforce the values and helped promote inclusion. I had a lot of conversations to educate and bring others to repeat and convince. At one point in time, I was doing 18 meetings a day, one-on-one conversations to bring people on board, to hear what their thoughts were on these changes, and to really encourage them to be evangelists for these changes. After 9 months, which was a time that I was running Reddit, before I left, we went back and we checked. And we had a good outcome. Like, we went back and we checked with the people who had reported problems, and to make sure that they were not experiencing the same problems or different problems. And for the most part, they were pleased with where we were. And for the part that wasn't working, we did fire 1 more person. And for him, it was a problem because he couldn't stop using inappropriate language in emails and in conversations. Because I hired a diverse management team, I was able to hire team members that I shouldn't have been able to hire, people who are better and more qualified for their roles than they should have been. It was a strong flywheel effect where we were able to, because people saw that we had a diverse team, they were interested in joining, and they would bring people that they knew who were often from different backgrounds. So how do we get through it, and how do we break this pattern? I think we need to understand 3 things that we tried to do at Reddit. 1, attention doesn't move the needle. Good intent doesn't move the needle. Action does. The second part is, it's a systemic problem. It wasn't a problem of 1 or 2 bad eggs in the company. It was a cultural problem, and we needed a complete reset. The real solution, the third part is, you need to admit that you have a systemic problem that needs to be fixed across the board. Just because a lot of other companies have similar problems doesn't mean it's okay. And the part that really helped across all of these areas was that leadership was fully engaged. I was part of the conversations, I was introducing the issues, and it was one of my key priorities. So what do I encourage you to do? I really want you to think about these 3 values and how to incorporate them in your companies. Inclusion means everyone. To change from an exclusionary biased culture to an inclusive culture means including everyone. It's a shift in thinking from doing the same thing that we've been doing, which we know doesn't work, to thinking about who is not able to participate or who isn't getting a fair opportunity to be part of this and why. It's comprehensive. It's part of everything that you do. You should be thinking about diversity and inclusion as you would any other business imperative. You should be funding it, you should be staffing it, and you should be measuring it. You should also be treating it as part of goals. You should have goals around diversity and inclusion, and it should also be part of everybody's goals, not just from an inclusion standpoint, but every goal you have. People should be thinking about, what are the potential impacts of this goal? Are there people that it's going to harm? Are we thinking about the potential harm? Does it seem to have a different impact on different communities? If you want to, have diversity and inclusion as part of your company, you need to make sure you treat it as part of your company. And, we don't tell people when we try to get our product to be sold to do that on their free time and hope that it works without tracking results and sales. Don't do that for DEI. Make sure that you're actually measuring it. Make sure that you're treating it the same way that you would anything else. And then the third part, of course, is metrics. Make sure that you're measuring everything. Make sure that you have transparency and set the goals that you want to achieve longer term, and then work backwards from there. Longer term, companies should be looking at being representative of the workforce, being representative of the population. And we have a long way to go looking at incrementally improving. We've seen that from all the tech companies. That doesn't work. So how do you get to the big goal of
overall representation and stop comparing with other companies that aren't working, that are broken. It's easy to say, let's do it. And it's easy to actually not do it because we don't have a lot of accountability. Sometimes the press pops up for a minute, but we don't, and we respond in a very reactive way. And at the end of the day, like, we really need to think about things from this long-term perspective and to make sure that we hold everyone accountable, because then you won't have to do it again. People will fall in line once they understand the expectations and boundaries. I know a lot of people in this industry. I've been in this industry for decades, and what I hear from a lot of the people who have harassed or have done things that they're not proud of is they just didn't understand. Like, the industry, everybody was doing it. Nobody told me I shouldn't do it. Like, people need to understand the boundaries. They need to understand that there are accountability measures and they're going to be held responsible. So I just want you to think, about yourself and your role in this changing the world. What we've learned is that everybody benefits from inclusion, even including white cisgender men. That's what we're learning from people who are graduating and coming into the workforce. And that's what we should be modeling and doing for everyone. As an individual, don't be the person who does nothing or who supports the system. People are listening and they're receptive to what you want to do. I hope by the end of this conversation, you decide that you do want to change things. And I hope by the end of this week that you start and you take the first steps to doing it. And I hope by the end of this year, you can point to a set of real actions that you did that were very impactful and helped change everything, and so that we can have this reset that we so desperately need. Thank you.
Ellen, thank you so much for that. What an insightful speech you gave. And I think all of us know that, yes, we need big change. To get there, we need to take risks. It's going to be a lot of work, a lot of hard work, but ultimately the enormous benefits of having a more diverse workplace are well worth the effort. So thank you very much for that. There are some questions from the audience, actually from Twitter. So Nancy from Twitter asks, I'm a woman of color working in STEM, and I have a hard time finding allies or even asking for allyship. Where do I start?
I think there are two things to think about. And one is, do you have people that you know already who can be allies? It feels uncomfortable to ask for help, but the worst thing that can happen is they can say no, right? They can say they're too busy, or they can say they don't feel qualified, or they can say that another reason. But if you ask, it can't hurt. And it's the practice of asking that will help you, continue to ask and to find that person who actually is willing to help. The second part is also, there are many different groups that perhaps you can join. If you have an ERG group, an employee resources group within your company or within your community, there may be groups that are aligned with your identity. If there are a lot of women's groups, there are a lot of groups around different other identities that can be helpful, where you can find perhaps not a single ally, but a group of allies. And it's having those conversations. Like, almost anybody can be an ally, and it's just finding those relationships, making the ask, and seeing where it goes.
Yeah, Ellen, I have a follow-up question for that. Does a woman of color necessarily need to seek an ally that's also a woman of color, or is there benefits to seeking an ally from an out group?
There are benefits from having allies from different groups. And I think it is helpful to have somebody who shares your identity, because there are things that you are going through that people who don't share that identity are not going to be able to understand and potentially help you with. But there are also benefits from seeing the other perspective, from seeing what's worked for other people, and from, especially if you're in a group that is very underrepresented, being able to draw from a wider pool. So, you'll learn different things from different allies, and having a group of different allies can be really helpful.
Yeah, good point to remember. You can have more than one ally, right? Ideally. Kate from Twitter asks, I'm starting out in STEM, but I want to get promoted. Which skills will give me the edge? And by the way, I love that she's just starting out and already wants to be promoted. Wow. That is awesome.
That is awesome. And, it depends on the role that you're in. It depends on the job that you're in. I think a big part is, just from core skills, it's like speaking up, letting people know that you want the promotion, asking them what their expectations are and the timeline for getting promoted, and then, just making sure that you're there for opportunities and being flexible. Perhaps the opportunity is not in your group, perhaps it's outside. So, keeping and building connections, so that you can hear about opportunities, and then keeping an open mind.
Yeah, interesting that statistically, more men feel that they're ready for promotions than women do. Women tend to think that we need to check all the boxes before we're ready. And so to really encourage women to seek out that promotion, even if they don't fill every single box, they still might be qualified for that position. And that's how we get, that's how we continue our career trajectory. That's how we get ultimately into the C-suite and into the boardrooms. So really take those risks.
Yeah, I think that we know that there's bias in a lot of these industries, and people might not think that you want that job. They might not see you as being, they might not see a woman in that role, or somebody from your identity. So you should let it be known, because it might change how they think about you and the opportunities they give you if they're thinking about trying to promote you instead.
Margaret from LinkedIn asks a question that's right up your alley, Ellen. It says, companies made a lot of promises about increasing diversity, but it doesn't seem like many made progress. How do employees hold their senior leaders accountable to increase representation?
What we're seeing so much of today is that has been really effective is labor organization. So workers uniting to try to push for change, whether it's around drafting a letter and having people sign it from across the company that we've seen at Google, at Amazon, calling attention, talking to reporters about problems. A lot of that labor organization is new to tech, but it's been extremely powerful and effective. We're seeing it on university campuses. We're seeing it around all different places. So I think it's, kind of finding the people who share your perspective. Maybe it's through an ERG group. Maybe it's through people that from the team that you're on, and seeing, can you speak up as a group? Can you bring things up as an individual and see what happens? And if it's not working, then try to bring some more voices to part of that. And part of that will be like figuring out, like, what are you comfortable doing? Are you comfortable bringing it up in front of your ERG? Are you comfortable trying to organize a whole group of people? I think companies are going to have to be more responsive to public pressure, to organized workforces, and I think that's a good thing. I think that it'll force them to be more responsive, and I'm glad to see that people are thinking about, like, how do I call out my company, because we're not seeing the things that are happening working, and our current ways of dealing with it aren't working either.
Ellen, thank you so much. And personally, I would like to thank you for all the hard work, for the risks that you personally have taken on behalf of women and people of color and less represented groups the world over. Your work is so important, and I think that we need pioneers like you. So thank you for what you're doing and for that great talk. And now I would like to toss it back over to the Udacity team for closing remarks.
Thank you, Ellen, for your amazing, compelling closing keynote. Your talk was inspiring, and I hope all business leaders that attended this virtual conference take these insights back to their organization and create more opportunities for women to enter the STEM industry and rise through the ranks. I also wanted to thank all of today's speakers for taking time out of their busy schedules to participate in our conference today. If you missed any of this great content or want to revisit a panel discussion, visit our STEM Forward with Women site or our YouTube channel to access the recorded sessions. Also, don't forget, every attendee has been entered into our giveaway. The STEM Forward with Women giveaway gives 50 virtual conference attendees the chance to win one free nanodegree program of their choice. Each winner will also have the opportunity to donate 5 scholarships to a woman they know who wants to enter the STEM field. We will notify winners via email and also announce them in our thank you email that will go out to all attendees. I hope you all enjoyed this conference as much as I did, and that you are inspired to drive change and inclusion in your workforce today, not just because it's great for your business, It's also the right thing to do. Thank you for attending today, and take care, everyone.